Okay, so officially welcome to our April webinar. The weird title, ending with part one, is because this will be a two-part topic, two-part webinar. Both of them this month and next month will deal with the topic of recovery and therapy. And in general, what is it that we can expect to get out of treatment and how therapy usually looks like for skin picking, at least the way that we approach therapy at Skin Pick. Uh, Today, I will tell you about a case, or rather, I will show one specific process went with a client of mine, a client that has given me permission to share everything I will share with you this evening, so that you can see not just like the good sides of therapy, but also the obstacles that people face and the difficulties, because I think that part's also important. This client has made tremendous progress. I just don't want to make it seem like it was, a walk in the park. So this is why I chose this specific case, because it is a person with whom I've encountered a number of difficulties when we were working together. And then next month, uh, hopefully you will have an interview with a person who has recovered from skin picking. So we will conduct a live interview during the webinar, so that then you can ask any questions directly to the client as well, not just to me as a therapist. I think it would be interesting to kind of compare and contrast two different perspectives on the process. One from the person who struggles with skin picking, and then from the point of view of the therapist, which is what inevitably you get when you talk to me. Just to make it clear, these will be two different clients. So let's get started. Of course, as always, once I'm done with the webinar, we will have a Q&A session, as always, so you can ask questions along the way, or if you have any question that you would like me to answer, you can post it right now, and then I will get to it once I'm done. So let me introduce you to the client that I will be talking about. So this is a 34-year-old client. She's a graphic designer and she has her own studio. So she worked for a while for someone else, and then she quickly started her own business. So by the time that she started working with me at SkinPick, she already had her own studio for, I don't know, several years at least. Right. So and it was a studio that was well established, and she had several designers working for her. She has been struggling with skin picking for about 20 years. It started when she was 14 years old. What she identifies as starting as kind of like the beginning or the first periods of picking had to do when she relocated to another school. And she relocated to another school because her parents had gotten divorced at that time. And so she doesn't describe the divorce itself as being triggering in any way, because her parents apparently were very nice about that. But it was when she moved to another school where she had to fit in with another crowd, and she struggled to do that. At her previous school, she was one of the popular girls, and then in the new school, she was basically invisible. So that change was very difficult for her, and she found herself struggling to adapt to this new situation. This is when she first started picking. Incidentally, this was also a period when she started getting acne, so there was plenty to pick at, once she started picking. In addition to skin picking, she also has social anxiety. Although that's not something, as she put it to me, it's not something you would ever be able to tell, in social settings. So she's good at hiding it. And then occasionally she also pulls her hair from the pubic area. So hair pulling and skin picking very frequently go hand in hand, sometimes both at the same time. And then at other times, a person will struggle with hair pulling for a period of time, and then with skin picking, of course, or vice versa. But this client specifically pulled from her pubic area because, in general, the risky zone for her was the bathroom. And in addition, pulling from the pubic area made her BFRB practically invisible to the outside world. Sorry. So in the past, before coming to skin pick, she tried all kinds of stuff. And in fact, in her introductory, when she filled out the intake questionnaires, she wrote this. I used the quote of hers here in the end. So she tried just stopping, the most popular method. She tried vibrating bracelets, several of them actually. She tried psychotherapy too, but then struggled, as she says, to connect with her therapist. And when she made her initial entry in the intake questionnaires, she finished it like this. She said, "I've tried everything." I underlined the text, but she put it in caps lock, and nothing worked. "I'm just trying this too, but I'm not hopeful that I can stop." So right there from the beginning, you can kind of see that she's entering therapy with a mindset that basically says you won't succeed at this. So this, I wouldn't say, was an alarm for me, because people, when they come to therapy, are often sick and tired of struggling with skin picking, and they feel they will write things like this, but won't necessarily mean that they're not going to actively participate in the process, just that they're at a difficult place in their life, right? But for some reason, I don't know, maybe experience, maybe just randomly, this kind of, I don't know, I read this and I thought, there's something there. And it proved that my intuition was right on that one. Um, I think one thing that struck me there is that she said that she struggled to connect with her therapist. And as I was responding to her messages, I kind of felt that I wasn't connecting with her either. And I will explain why. So the first thing that you do when you start skin pick is that you begin your treatment with habit reversal training. So it's like a very simple behavioral intervention. We've had, I think, one or two webinars on different aspects of HRT, so you can find those if you're interested in learning about the theory. I'm not going to get into it too much. But the point of that is to become aware of your patterns that surround picking, where you do it, what triggers it, what is the process like, what thoughts and emotions you have before, during, after, and so on. So in general, to infuse more awareness into it, to learn from it, and then to substitute picking with a different habit, right? So that's what we do in the beginning, because I don't think it solves the whole problem, but it certainly gives a person enough control over their symptoms, and it's really empowering when you're able to conquer picking and reduce your symptoms in a relatively short period of time. So it's a very appropriate way to start treatment. And the way we start doing this is by learning about all sorts of patterns that have to do with picking. First, we identify what the triggers are, we identify what the process is like, we identify the emotional background, and so on. So we have an app that you can use it for free as well, but we also have all our clients use the app. And in addition to this, because this client's picking was mainly automatic, so mindless, unconscious, we made a deal that she will wear a lot of heavy bracelets and noisy jewelry, and that she will try to keep her phone in her hands all the time. Not because it will stop her from picking, but simply because if you have something heavy in your hand, you will be more aware of that hand moving. And the same thing goes if you have your phone in your hand, and if it's the hand that you use to pick with, if you're going to leave the phone down and then reach towards your face, you're simply more likely to notice the maneuver. So that's the reason why it was kind of additional aid for her. And then right from the beginning, we encountered a number of issues. First, she would forget to record. So she would notice that she's speaking, then she would say, "I'll just record this later," and then later she wouldn't really be able to remember the details. There's a reason why we emphasize recording in the app in real time. It's because 5 hours later, we won't remember the details of what we were thinking about or what we were feeling, or sometimes even, where we were and what triggered it. So it is really important to do that in real time. And she kept forgetting to do this. In fact, she would forget very often to log into the program. I had to send her messages to remind her, to kind of see how she's doing, to ask if I can do something else to help her be more proactive about the program. She would insist that she has no feelings or thoughts before, during, or after, which is quite difficult. As long as our brains or bodies are working, they are producing something. So it's kind of hard to say I have no thoughts or feelings. Or sometimes she would tell me, well, what's the point of self-monitoring? I already know so much about this. I've been doing this for 20 years. What am I going to learn that's new? Right? Or then she would say, well, can this go any faster? Why do I have to spend 2 weeks observing my picking? I've been doing it for 20 years. Can I just stop it now? Right. And so I'm a very patient person, so I'm never in a rush. So I would explain all these things in detail, like why is it that we cannot go any faster? If we're following a protocol, why is it that then we have to adhere to the protocol? Spoiler alert, is because that's the only way it works. So we had a number of, I wouldn't say disagreements, but a number of issues that she would kind of present as a done deal. I forget to enter stuff into the app, therefore nothing can be done about this. Habit reversal training is very simple on paper. Like when you write down the steps, it's really very simple, but it's not that easy. And if you skip this stage where you self-monitor and learn about your patterns and habits, you're not going to figure out that easily like what techniques to implement to replace speaking. And then in addition to this, if your picking is mindless and you're not conscious of it, you can choose the most perfect technique in the world. You will not even know that you need to use it. So self-monitoring and this part that we call awareness training is incredibly important. But with this client, it didn't really start off very well because she wasn't feeling very motivated to work, and no matter what I would do, how much I would explain, it felt like I wasn't really reaching her. Then we came to the point somehow to implement competing responses. Typically, you do this after about 3 weeks, providing that you do everything regularly. But with her, it took, I think, a little over a month before we came to the point that we were actually implementing replacement habits. So first, she selected 7 or 8 of them. Then I suggested that that might be too much because a competing response is supposed to be a habit that competes with skin picking. And I'm yet to meet a person that is capable of introducing 8 habits at the same time. So it took us a while to narrow it down to something that would cover most situations, but not all where she picks. And that was a stress ball. So I said, okay, let's use the stress ball. So use it as much as you can. Practice. I gave her all the instructions. And then she wouldn't follow up. I would ask, if she's using it, how is that going? And then she would say things like, well, when I use it, it works, right? So we introduced additional techniques to supplement this. She would pick in her car, so I said maybe you can try wearing gloves. She would pick when she reads. Gloves also work there. Bathroom turned out to be a very risky area, so I said maybe you can try standing away from the mirror, using a timer, dimming your lights. But there would always be these little problems that would come up. At one point, she wrote these 2 things to me. This isn't working. It didn't work before, meaning when she tried this with her previous therapist and on her own. And it's not going to work now. Nothing is different. I just don't care about limiting my time in the bathroom. It's my bathroom. I'll stay there for as long as I want to. And then, the WTF. And then another one. I want to change, but I don't want to change anything except for picking. My life is fine. I just want the picking gone, and I want the rest to stay as it is now because it's good. I like it, and I chose it. And so this is what really, like if I had these little bells in my brain from time to time, this set off a whole alarm system very loudly. Because this sentence was very illustrative to me. I want to change, but I don't want to change anything. And this sentence came at a point when every question that I would ask would necessarily lead us in the direction of maybe her working too much and then being so exhausted after work that she wouldn't simply care if she picks or if she doesn't pick. Or situations where she was in a relationship where she wanted to be the best girlfriend she could possibly be, which would often go against her needs to sleep and rest and do things that she was interested in. But then there was this pressure to present herself in a certain way, So it meant ignoring her needs or going against what she actually wanted to do. And then every time I would suggest a slight modification of this, she would put up a wall and say, no, 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 I can't work less. Like I have a business to run. I can't change the way I am in my relationship because that's my relationship. I want my boyfriend to see me in a certain way. If I would say, okay, maybe when you work, break it up into, like periods and then insert breaks in between, then she would say, well, that's just not practical. You're not an artist. You don't know how that works. Like if I get into the flow, then I just cannot go around and take a walk. So basically, we would identify these things that would make picking worse or just outright cause picking. But whenever I would suggest a modification that would solve something in the long run, she would just say, no, 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 that's just not acceptable. And then when she wrote this, I want to change, but I don't want to change anything except for picking. I thought, okay, so there's really no way around this. We kind of have to address the elephant in the room, which is resistance to change. Um, so I kind of openly addressed the topic. And then I also gave her a very long, like two paragraphs of text explaining why is it that I think that we're having an issue with resistance. So first of all, this sentence, I want things to be different basically, but I don't want to do anything differently. Just on the face of it, opposes the very idea of change because change means not doing things the way you did until now, right? But in addition to that, there were a lot of these little signs of resistance that were visible. Not answering my questions, for example. So sometimes I would have to go back and remind her that I asked the question, or sometimes I wouldn't even finish typing all my answers to her, and I would already receive responses if she was online, and then I would ask a question, like um, something that would require you to elaborate, to think, reflect on your experience and your feelings, and I would get these very short, like yes, no, maybe answers, which basically mean I really didn't give this much thought, especially when an answer arrives 2 minutes after I ask it and it's no. And what I asked was something that would take a few days to reflect on. Then there was this insistence that there's really nothing to skin picking except for just the behavior of skin picking, meaning that it has nothing to do with her lifestyle, that it has nothing to do with how she sees herself, nothing to do with expectations that she has of herself, nothing to do with the stress, with the anxiety, even to the point where she would say things like, okay, so maybe this was triggered by my anxiety, but I don't care about that. I just care about not picking. It's almost like she was trying to tell me everything that's beneath the surface. Let's just put that aside, shall we? We don't want to deal with this, right? And then there was this thing that she would give up on anything that I would suggest that she tries. The first time this thing would fail. I see a few of you raising your hands now. Just please enter the questions in the Q&A if you have any, or if you have your own example to share or a story to tell. That would also, I think, be nice to, if you feel willing to share. I won't read your name. I will just read the content of what you share. So she would like try something once and it would work. Then she would try to take, like, for example, the stress ball. Like she would use it for 2 days because it would work well. And then the third day, if it doesn't work once, she would just immediately say, so the stress ball doesn't work anymore. It's no longer efficient. It's almost like we're talking about something that you can develop, like resistance to. Like, so this drug worked and now it doesn't work anymore. That's basically how she would treat these. And then I asked her in more, not in these direct terms, although sometimes I have to say I can be quite direct. But what I was starting to wonder, and what I wanted to learn was what's actually worse, succeeding or failing at change? If you remember in the beginning, I told you that the way that she kind of formulated her initial entries to me implied that she actually wasn't expecting to get much out of the process except failure. I started to wonder if perhaps failing at this was the goal and not reducing picking. This might not seem like the most intuitive thing in the world, but this is something that's quite a useful way of looking at things. Like if you keep doing something and you want to be doing the opposite, but you actually, let's say you come to a crossroad and every time you go right, but you tell everyone, God, I wish I could just go left. You kind of have to start wondering at a certain point, like, is there an advantage to never changing your direction once you get there? Right. So, for example, I guess other kinds of therapists might talk about this as secondary gain. Like, what is it that you get from your symptom? I don't like this way of thinking because I don't know. It sounds like we're at a flea market bargaining over something. Because I don't think there's much to be gained, but there certainly is a function that picking performs. But this was really difficult to talk to her about because she wouldn't really acknowledge that there's anything to picking except the fact that she was picking her skin. So you cannot talk about the role or like the function of a symptom if she immediately says like this is a meaningless behavior that just needs to be removed. So we went about that in a slightly different way. So I didn't ask this question directly, but we were talking about different fears that she might have. So I would ask her things like, what is it that you're afraid of if you fail at this? Like what could happen? How would you feel about yourself if you fail to change at the pace at which you want? Would that change something about how you think of yourself? Or what would you do if you didn't pick tomorrow? Like, how would your life be different? And we managed to isolate a few fears that she had, and I will tell you about each of them because I think uh, very few people have all of these, but all of them, I would say individually, are quite common. So she had fear of failing to change, of simply not being good enough. Um, this specifically came up when we started talking about, she kept saying how she would benefit from having a meditation practice. And then, of course, if you've been to any of my webinars, you know that I like meditation very much and I like to use it. So I immediately said, okay, so let's just set up one. It'll take 15 minutes a day. That's an amount of time that it's easy to find if you want to. But then she was like, nah, I'm just saying that it would be really good to try, but I'm really not good at meditation. And then she actually said, I always fail at it. And I was really puzzled by the idea that you can actually fail at sitting and just existing. So, in that sense, she was afraid that if she would really truly invest herself in the process, and then if she didn't get enough from the process to say that she was successful, that she was going to feel like a complete failure. And when I asked, what is it that would what is it that you would have to achieve to say that this was successful for you? And then she said, well, obviously to stop picking. So she would kind of set herself up to fail there, not because it's not possible to stop picking, but because she wanted the process to be fast, efficient, not to actually deal with her emotions or thoughts in any way. And it had to be like all or nothing. To me, that sounded pretty much like self-sabotage right from the start. You expect yourself to achieve the impossible, of course you're going to end up feeling not good enough. And it also revealed a little bit of an all or nothing pattern to her thinking. Then there was the fear of not having good coping skills if picking is gone. This was actually quite an interesting conversation that we had, and I think one of those rare moments in our work together in that initial stage that she actually opened up to me and she kind of wrote this very vulnerable message. And she said, I was thinking about this and I really don't know what is it that I would do if I wouldn't pick. I've been picking for 20 years. It's my go-to. It's something I do every day. She said, it's as much a habit as brushing my teeth is. And she said, I don't know what I would do. And also in mind, because she actually used this phrase, I don't have good coping skills. To me, that was a sign that some of what I was trying to explain, that picking is not just this weird behavior that you do, that some of that was kind of starting to get through her all the obstacles that she put in front of, rather between us. So I thought that was a good sign, but it turned out that I was not really very right about that, um, as you will see. So then we talked about fear of being overwhelmed. I once gave her an experiment to do, which was something that I ask people very frequently to try out when they don't know how to describe the urge to pick. I will tell them when they catch themselves picking to just put their hands in their lap for a couple of minutes, 2 minutes or 3, and just observe what's happening in their chest, abdomen, shoulders. Just pay attention to body sensations. I asked her to do this, and then I followed up and asked how it went, and then followed up again, but I never received a response at the time. And then when we were discussing her resistance to therapy, she told me that she did it and that she almost had a panic attack, how overwhelmingly anxious she became. So there was this fear that she's always going to be overwhelmed with intense feelings. Then there was a fear of missing out on ambitions and desires in her life. She was a very proactive person with a very bad case of FOMO, and having a moment in her day when she wasn't productive or doing something, as she would say, to further grow and improve as a person. I say, as she would say, because it always sounded so, I don't know, strange to put it that way. It was very officially worded. So there was that she felt if we could continue to explore what picking was a part of, what it comes out of, that she would have to make some cuts in her life that she maybe wasn't ready to make. There was a fear of being alone because part of her having to do everything so well is to be like the best girlfriend that her boyfriend can possibly have. And then if she would maybe do something differently in her relationship to just kind of let go of a little bit of the stress that she was imposing on herself, she was afraid that he was going to leave her and that she was going to end up alone. And then overall, there was a fear that if she stopped picking and if she found herself in this space where she would have to make these changes in her life, that she would never reach her full potential. And then I told her, what does that mean? I mean, how does one know? Like, what does it mean to reach your full potential? And she said, well, I don't know what that means, but I know for sure I wouldn't be there if I made these changes that you keep suggesting. And I very rarely actually tell people what to do, but she says, well, I work too much. Maybe I shouldn't work that hard. And then I say, well, would you consider working less? And then she said, no, what a preposterous suggestion to make, Vladimir. So that's what she would mean by me suggesting things. And as she kind of reflected on this, it took a while. This was quite an intense back and forth. It took about 2 weeks. And that was, I think, the first time since we started working together that she actually was engaged in our correspondence. Before that, she felt kind of detached. But when we started talking about her resistance to change, that suddenly got her involved. And then I got this message. I've been reflecting on our conversation for a long time. In all honesty, I see your point and I hate it. I hear this very frequently. Therapists are just very annoying with it. Anyways, I'm afraid that dealing with picking might require me to overhaul my life in a way I'm not ready to do right now. I can't fathom the possibility of giving up on my career goals or anything else. I've always been ambitious, and it makes me feel like a failure to contemplate this option. If that means that I'm going to continue to do this, so be it. At least I'm being honest and not wasting your time or mine. So, just to be clear, here she decided to stop the treatment, and I didn't even have a chance to respond to that message because she just canceled her subscription, which meant that I couldn't write to her anymore. So I emailed her and said that she's welcome back at any time, and that I understand that she might not be ready to change, but right now, but that this could possibly, change in the future, and that she might become ready to do something about picking. And then if that day should come, that I would be more than happy to continue working with her. And then I received no response. So as you can see, this does not start as a particularly happy tale. So this was after she quit after session 3 and after 2 months in the treatment. Normally people would get to session 3 in under a month. So it was quite prolonged and slow, and which is fine for some people. They like the pace, but she wasn't happy with it. And then when she reflected on all these topics, all these fears that we have identified, she simply decided that it was time to stop therapy. However, I mean, when I thought about that later on, I thought that this was the way that she would tell me about her previous experiences and her struggles to connect with her therapists and how nothing ever worked. I thought this was a more honest answer in a way, because she didn't say, oh, well, you know, this doesn't work for me. She said, this is taking me in a direction that I'm not ready to take. So she wrote in all honesty, and I really thought that she was quite honest there. So for me, even though I was sorry to see her go, I thought at least being honest as to where she is right now and being honest about not being ready to change and not being ready to give up on picking, I thought that was a fair thing to do, that kind of acceptance, even if that acceptance is not very pleasant because you're also accepting that you're not ready to change. But I felt that she understood that picking is not just some abstract, meaningless thing, that it actually does a lot for her. In a weird way, it was something that had kept her life together, or at least large portions of her life together. Because all the stress and all the suffering that came out of what the goals that she would set for herself, all of it found an outlet in picking. So in that sense, I thought that even though she was stopping treatment, that this was not a bad place for her to be in. And then almost a year later, like almost to a day after she canceled, she renewed her subscription. And I saw this quite accidentally, to be honest. I was just looking like once a week or once every 2 weeks. I will just kind of check up on clients that are not active and just to see if they're okay, if there's anything I can do for them. And so I came across her username as an active client, and I thought, didn't she cancel, a long time ago? And then I clicked on her profile, and I saw that she renewed her subscription a week before, but she didn't really write anything, so I didn't get any notifications, because unless you write something, I just don't, I don't know if I mean, I can check, I just don't check these things. And I decided to send her a message and welcome her back into the program, and I asked her if there's, if she could possibly review our previous work together so that we can discuss, how to proceed and what kind of plan we can make and how to avoid the pitfalls that we obviously ran into the first time. Even though she had resistance to change, it doesn't mean that I couldn't have done something differently. So I thought it would be a good idea to examine all that. And then she wrote back, she wrote this lengthy message saying that there were basically three things that got her to come back to therapy. One was the pandemic, which really kind of shocked her radically. Not, I mean, obviously it was a shock to everyone, but what it showed specifically to her was that all her plans could just be derailed by something that she cannot influence, no matter how much she works and how hard she tries, because her business suffered quite a lot in these initial stages of the pandemic, and there was nothing that she could do about that, right? And suddenly she couldn't travel, she couldn't leave her house, her life was restricted in so many ways, and she felt completely out of control. Then she was going through a breakup, so she wasn't the perfect girlfriend anymore, and it was quite a messy breakup at that, and this additionally destabilized her. And then she said that after she quit the program the first time around, she had had a panic attack a few months after that. And I asked what that was about and why that was such a powerful experience for her, because she had mentioned social anxiety and she mentioned feeling sometimes like, on the verge of panic, although she had never called her symptoms full-on panic attacks before. And she said that a lot of what we talked about stayed with her, and that she felt very angry at me for a while because of the questions that I was asking. And I mean, that is something that I think every therapist gets. If they ask important questions, people will sometimes be upset by them. And she said particularly one question struck her, which was that I asked her, like, it sounds even rude when I put it like this, but it made sense in the context. I asked her, why is it that she's making her own life more difficult than it has to be? And she said that this question really just upset her very much. And even after we stopped working together, she kept kind of going back to that question. It was, for some reason, it just wouldn't leave her. And then she was thinking about all these ways in which she's making her own life more difficult than it has to be. And it caused her to have what she described as a panic attack. And then, as these three things coincided over a period of time, she decided that maybe it's time to give therapy another go. So she decided to return. Uh, I say we continued our work, but basically we started from scratch. So we went back to the beginning. She said essentially that she wants me to disregard all the answers that she gave previously. And she read through all of it. She's not interested in building on any of that. She said, let's just, pretend I'm in therapy for the first time and let's just, walk me through the whole thing. I'll do everything as you tell me. And so we started kind of exploring her history with picking. We started talking about all the insights that she had in the year that she wasn't in therapy with me. And this time she did it kind of really exactly as it was supposed to be done. She self-monitored, even though she hated it. We customized it so that it doesn't bother her too much. And that part started unfolding at a pace that I would expect and accept. And she identified as the crux of her problem something that she called her unholy trinity, which I really thought was a really nice way to describe something that is not so nice, which is a combination of perfectionism, control issues, and cruelty. And cruelty here is towards herself, not towards anyone else. So that was her unholy trinity. Three things that she thought were behind picking. And so she said, because she was very kind of practical and very proactive, very motivated to work this time around, she said, let's just do something about all of these and then kind of work parallel because they're obviously connected. So if we attack the problem from three different sides, maybe that will work. And I said, okay, let's give it a try. So we established 3 daily practices for her, in addition to habit reversal training, which we were doing at the time. We established a practice that we called daily imperfections, then daily spontaneities, and then self-compassion and forgiveness. One was meant to address perfectionism, one to address control, and then one to address, well, two rather, self-compassion and forgiveness, to address what we call cruelty. Because it kind of made sense to assume that if she was cruel to herself, if she would practice self-compassion, that might actually, and forgiveness, that might change the way that she relates to herself and maybe, the way that she relates to her suffering in addition. And also both forgiveness and self-compassion are actually quite good ways to counterbalance perfectionism. Forgiveness is, really directly the opposite of it. It's you learning to say to yourself that it's fine if you make mistakes. Right. So she started doing these. Daily imperfections meant that she was going to do something every day, something at work or at home, but that she's not going to stop when it's only 90% done. So she's not going to expect perfection. This proved to be a little bit tricky because if 100% is unattainable, then you can easily make 90% unattainable too. So we had to imagine, let's say if she's cleaning her house, she had a sibling and then her sibling was sloppy. So we would find a midpoint between perfect and sloppy and say, let's just do it that way. And then we would talk about how that would make her feel. What was it like to be in a house that wasn't made perfectly, or what's it like to send an email without rereading it 3 times and just typing it and sending it. And we would study whether or not this actually impacts her life in any way. Daily spontaneities were essentially small adventures that she would implement every day. And when I say adventure, take that with a grain of salt. For someone with such a full schedule, just taking an unplanned break can be an adventure. So we would implement these little things like take a 35-minute break, 30-minute break from work and have Skype coffee with your mom, something like that. But it would have to change every day. and it would never be at the same time, because the idea would be to do something that would, at least for a little while and in controlled circumstances, break up her control. Because if you do something alone, you're likely to be able to do it exactly how you want. But if you are doing something with other people, then you have to make compromises, sometimes compromises that you don't like or cannot even anticipate. And she had a friend that was quite helpful there. They worked close by, and then her friend would challenge her in a different way, like a small way, but a different way every day, like eating the food that she never had before, or just doing something strange when they meet. And then there was the self-compassion and forgiveness, which we started as just formal meditation that she would do 10 to 15 minutes a day. Then after the first 2 months of this, let's say, second cycle that we were working on, her picking had reduced by about 50%, because we have these questionnaires that people fill out. So we track how intense their symptoms are. And hers had reduced by 50%. And most of her struggle at that point was automatic picking and pubic hair pulling. But she kind of acknowledged at the time that she wasn't quite ready to tackle that problem. She said something along the lines of, well, if I have to give up all this picking, then I need to keep pulling at least for a while until I develop something else, another healthier way of coping. So we put that off the table, and that spontaneously went away during our treatment. She also started considering, she was quite good with her competing responses. As you can see, 50% less after 2 months is not bad at all, at least not in my book. But she was kind of, at least in her opinion, she was being a little obsessive about her competing responses and all the habits that she was introducing. So in my opinion, I don't think she was, but she did approach it as, the way you would approach a school project. So you have to do everything by the book. But this was her dilemma, in the sense that she was starting to wonder whether her tendency to do things in such a diligent way was that. I guess it kind of explained to her why perfectionism was so difficult to get rid of, because it really does help you achieve remarkable results. But the side effect is that you are always unhappy with yourself. Because when we talked about this and discussed this, I said how proud I am of her and the work that she did, because she really did do a great job. And she said, yeah, but I really should work harder. It's just 50%. Like half of the problem was gone in 2 months, and all she could see was that half of it was still there. So maybe her perfectionism helped her achieve a lot, but it also blinded her to the magnitude of what she actually achieved. Practicing daily imperfections was very helpful because it gave her an insight into her perfectionism, or how difficult it was to do things even 10% below her standard. Like if our deal was this week, every day you have to send 2 emails without reading them twice, so just typing an email and sending, that would be incredibly difficult for her. But it did a little to lessen her perfectionism, and the spontaneity routines really helped her with control issues. She started thinking that perhaps she could let go of a large part of what she thought was controlling too many things. She kind of spotted this paradox, that on one hand, you need control to get things done, so that you're not anxious with all these like obligations and chores just floating around. So you need to structure and organize things. But then at the same time, the way she does it creates anxiety instead of removing anxiety. So she should become aware that there's something about control that's not quite right. And we would address this at a later stage in the program. So once habit reversal was complete, meaning when she had an appropriate replacement, in all the situations where she was picking. And when she managed to establish most of these as habits that successfully compete with picking, we moved on to the next part of the program, and which is based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And so the central theme of acceptance and commitment therapy, at least in the way that I do it, is experiential avoidance. Um, so at this point, and even in our first cycle when we were working together, she struggled to not to recognize, but to, I think, maybe first to recognize, but then also to admit that that picking actually served a very specific purpose, which was to help her avoid dealing with, to feel all the stress that she was under, and to feel all the dissatisfaction from her lifestyle, to feel all the unmet needs that she had at work and in her relationships. So it was a really good, like, unhealthy but very efficient mechanism. If you remember, when she quit for the first time, she pretty much said, if I stop picking, all this will unravel and I don't want this to happen. So that means that picking kind of kept it together, and that's what it did, because it helped her avoid the cost of all her behaviors. And by the time we came to this part of the program, she was ready to deal with it. And so this specifically helped us work on her emotions and her thoughts that were kind of underlying picking. Thoughts were mostly negative, as you can assume, that she'll never really stop picking, that at work, that whatever she does is not original, is not creative enough, she's not productive enough, whatever you want to do, but then just add not enough. Basically, that's what it looked like. But because of the techniques that acceptance and commitment therapy offers, we were able to kind of start reframing control from controlling outcomes to controlling her actions. By the lack of spell check on this slide, you can see that perfectionism is not one of my problems in life. So our rough plan was to kind of reframe control in terms of her dealing with whatever comes up instead of controlling what comes up. Like that, in a nutshell, that is what we did. Now, there's a number of techniques from acceptance and commitment therapy that can be quite helpful with this. And one of the things that we did was to address her thoughts that would usually get her to spiral into feeling very anxious and then pick afterwards, to address them by diffusing them, by creating a little bit of space between her and her thoughts, by teaching her to recognize her thoughts as just thoughts and not something that's necessarily a fact, which again sounds much simpler than it actually is. And she really did learn to apply diffusion very well, and grounding techniques also, and all of this would help her soothe herself, but it wasn't really enough to tackle control completely. And so one question that we kept coming back to is, how can I trust myself? Because if you think about it, when you try to control outcomes, when you do things so that certain things will happen, you do that because you already have the toolbox to deal with these outcomes that will come about. Because you stage everything to happen exactly as you want it, meaning exactly as you can handle it. And then we talked about when you move control back to just dealing with whatever comes up, inside or outside, without controlling the outcomes, just kind of controlling your reactions and your responses to events. She kept running into this idea that it was very unsettling to think that she would allow herself to improvise a response instead of preparing herself for it. And here's what she wrote. It's a bit long, but it's, I think, really interesting and quite important. I understand that it's more efficient to control how I react, but how can I trust myself that I will know how to react well in the moment? I mean, what if it's a new moment? Something I've never experienced before. I'm just realizing this as I'm typing, But prediction and preparation and control, that's just me trying to get the world to play on my terms because I'm so insecure about entering the game otherwise. And I think a part of me knows that my control is an illusion, which is why I'm always so tense and anxious. I control so that I'm not too anxious, but I end up anxious nonetheless. So bizarre. But yeah, I don't trust myself. I feel like I'll fail myself if I trust myself. And this was quite a significant moment in our work together because um, this kind of tied in the cruelty, what she called the unholy trinity, all into one thing. I just don't trust myself. I need to have these absurdly high standards because I don't think I'll be motivated to work hard and improve myself. I have to control everything because I really don't trust that I have the skills to deal with this. I have to punish myself very severely because otherwise I don't think I'll learn the lesson because I don't trust myself. So over a period of time, what we did was implement all these little strategies. Like when she would do something well, we would talk about what inner resources she mobilized to deal with that situation. Because an inner resource is a resource, so it's something that's available to her at all times. Uh, I would have her journal every day in a separate worksheet about what skills she used today and what skills she could hone a bit better. Because I think in general, I think I don't like to analyze things like what mistakes I've made, but I don't also think it's healthy to ignore that part of ourselves. Because with a perfectionist, if you want them to say what they did wrong, that's really very easy because that's what perfectionists teach themselves to see. So I reframed it as in what is it that I already did well and where is it that I can improve? Where is it that I can improve is just a useful way of exploring errors. Because if I would ask her, so what is it that you did wrong? She would write a long text ending with, I'll never get better, I'm just a failure. And if I make her phrase things like, what is it that you can do better? Then my next question can be, okay, so whatever that is, it's a skill. Let's see how you can get that skill. So it would get her to slowly learn how to think in proactive terms. And that also means that her way of thinking shifted to um, to looking at um, to looking at the things that she's also doing well. Like she would look at the new skills that she gained or the improvements that she made. So it kind of also reframed this negative filter that she had as a default. Then, after 6 months, after coming back to the treatment, um, her picking had reduced by 80%. So she was at that point, after 6 months, she was picking only about 20% of the total picking when we started working together. And these 20% that were remaining proved to be quite stubborn. Um, and she was kind of at a stalemate there. She didn't know what to do. Like all the techniques were fine, but somehow she would just end up picking. And then she started questioning this kind of line between picking and grooming. That's not something that we talked about in the beginning because she had made it quite clear that the goal is to stop picking altogether. But at that point in our work together, she started wondering if perhaps a degree of picking was okay for her, and if some of it she could actually just call grooming. This was a difficult line to thread. It was really hard to create a definition of what where of what grooming is versus what picking is. There were some obvious things like there's no grooming on your shoulders, for example. All that would be picking. But when it came to her face, this is where the line was slightly blurred. And this is where, in my opinion at least, a first serious crack in perfectionism started to show. This wasn't the case from her perspective, and when I shared my observation, she said, well, you're just really being lovely and optimistic, but I just don't see it that way. So I said, okay, you know, If you don't see it, you don't see it. Whoops, sorry. This was me trying to move my leg, but instead I kicked my trash can. The reason why I say that this is where cracks in her perfectionism started showing was because she was first of all starting to get rid of this all or nothing mentality where you either never touch your face again or you're still picking and you have a problem. So it was less all or nothing. Because she was questioning, like maybe a degree of picking would actually be fine with her. Maybe some of it is just grooming, something that other people also do. That also meant that her thinking wasn't that black and white, too. So, from my point of view, those were movements forward, but it wasn't something that at that time she was able to see. And also, I could have been wrong. Maybe something else helped. Um, she experienced in the first 6 months that we've worked together, she experienced 2 relapses. So as you can see, her picking was not down to 0, but she would have like days when she wouldn't pick at all. And she had 2 quite, let's say, something that's worth calling a relapse, like a serious spike in picking. The first one was quite big. And it was after she lost a client at work. And she came home and just went into this very intense picking trance and just created a lot of spots all over her face and chest and shoulders. And she took it really hard. But this is where I think the first fruit of all the mindfulness became visible. Because when I told her, okay, so the most important thing now is to first of all take care of your skin, because in the past she had a few infections and it was important to make sure that everything is clean and hygienic and that she's helping her skin heal as fast as possible. I gave her a few practical assignments so that she can de-stress and soothe herself in a healthier way. And then in about a week, we came back to the relapse. And then we started analyzing what had happened and seeing how we can prevent it from happening in the future. And because this is a very intelligent client, she quickly kind of realized without me having to say it at all, so I could actually use these relapses to help myself in a more sustainable way. Like she basically started treating them as, bugs in the system that were supposed to be fixed so that system could work better overall. So when the second relapse came, which was a personal stress, which we agreed not to mention in public, she immediately saw that as, okay, so I need to fine tune my skills here. This is something that I can do on my own. I can analyze this. And she actually did all of it on her own. And she sent me a very long message where she kind of told me what she thought went wrong and how she can improve there. So to me, this was also a very good step. Both of these relapses, as weird as that sound, made me quite happy because they showed that it's not just that she reduced picking because she was very diligent about these behavioral techniques, but that something underneath was starting to change. And if you're a perfectionist or if you have control issues, you know how difficult this is. And you can imagine like how much hard work she put into this. So when I saw that it's, paying dividends now, I was really very happy for her. And at that point, especially when her second relapse came about, she was able to appreciate her own efforts, which was really lovely because it was not just me cheering her from the sides. She could also see, and she had full insight into how big of a deal this actually is. And even though she did learn to be kinder to herself, in terms of comforting herself and understanding that the urge is something that she will feel in stressful times and not to judge herself for it, perfectionism was still very much a part of her life when it came to her relationships or her work. And the last stage of our work dealt specifically with perfectionism. I won't go into too many details because I want to have some time to answer your questions as well. I will just explain some of the things that we did and I will paint this in very broad strokes because this is a topic unto itself. So maybe this summer, May or June, we can talk about this subject if it interests you. So first of all, we started from the practical stuff, like the very down to earth stuff, which is how is it that you set your goals? Because perfectionism tells you that you have to achieve something that's impossible, that usually means that the way a perfectionist sets goals isn't, the most realistic and the most sustainable goal setting in the world. So we implemented a way of setting goals that would take into consideration the context of her life, which may sound trivial to you, but for her, this was a huge revelation that there are more things, kind of understanding context, understanding that if she has a lot to do at work, that all the stress doesn't stop when she finishes her work and goes home. Like this idea that there's a larger balance to maintain, which I guess, like if you read in a self-improvement article, it sounds like duh. Of course, we have to have a healthy work-life balance. But for her, this was truly a discovery. Because one thing is to intellectually get an idea, a whole other thing is when you experientially realize it, understand it, feel it intimately when it happens to you. So, understanding that whatever goal she sets has to be considered in the wider context of other goals that she has, her mental capacities, her energy levels, whatever, layer you want to put there. This really helped. Although it helped more, I think, in the beginning to confuse her rather than help her change, because she just realized that that's a good argument as to why she would change, but specifically implementing different ways of setting goals wasn't as easy. And we used SMART goal setting, if you're familiar with that technique. We talked about that in that old webinar on perfectionism that we had. That was quite helpful for her. So we introduced a lot of these like practical ways so that she could work with context and understand how much she can realistically achieve. We worked on setting boundaries with other people, which was also quite a big deal to me, because when you set a boundary with your partner, you're really giving up on pleasing them and being the ideal version of whatever they imagine you should be. So this was quite a big deal for me when she was able to say to the men that she would date, so sorry, I really don't want to see you today. I'm too busy, or I'm too tired, or I just want to stay home and stare at the ceiling, doesn't matter what. So that was one thing. And then came something that was quite difficult, and something that was also, I think, left for her to finish on her own once we completed the treatment, which was to understand her own limitations. That there are some things at work that she simply can't do. Not because there's something wrong with her or because she's bad in any way, but because there's just too much to do. Like even a computer has a limit to how many things it can do at the same time. And we're not as efficient, so we have even more limitations. And accepting that perhaps she can't be everything to her partners, or that she can't be the perfect designer, and that not everything that she designs will be groundbreaking, that it's okay to sometimes just produce satisfactory things, to recognize that she won't be as creative as she wants all the time. So these kinds of limitations, kind of like boundaries, but in a different way. Whereas with boundaries, she would set them with other people. Here, she was exploring her own limits. Like we talked about them as literally limits that she cannot go past in that moment, but also as zones where she will develop in the future. Because if you think about it, every limitation is also a place for you to grow. And if personal growth is a value that you're committed to, as she was, then every limitation she would identify, we were able to reframe as being something that she will work on when the right time comes. And then mourning the loss of the perfect self. Because the image of perfection that she had in her head was just an image, not reality. The same way that, a landscape is not going to conform to a map, our actual lives and capacities will not conform to our idealized expectations. She had to kind of let go of that idea of what perfection is And the reason why I say to mourn the loss is because that really is like losing someone. In effect, she was losing who she thought she should be. It's an internal loss, but it's quite a real loss, and it's a big one at that. And as we were sort of finishing our work together, this is where I left her, and she essentially wanted to wrap up this part of the program because as she was, it felt like a moment, I think, to both of us where she could just continue on her own. It felt like she had the tools. Neither of us thought that the work was completely done, but life is sadly not very static, as you may have noticed in the past couple of years. So stuff always happens, and then we always have to change. So when you look at it from that perspective, our work is never done for as long as we're alive. But she felt that when it came to perfectionism, she had a direction, and she felt that she could do it on her own. Our work ended after 8 months, not counting the first 2 months that we basically didn't achieve anything, right? By the end of our treatment, her picking was over 80% reduced. She felt like she was at a place where it could work with a little bit of fine tuning, but overall she was in a good place. And there was that ever-changing boundary between what she thought was grooming and what was okay, and then what was picking. So overall, she was happy with that aspect. And what we did before she left was, there is a session in SkinPick that deals with relapse prevention. It's a huge session, but it's a very useful one because it gets you to reevaluate your entire toolbox and helps you sort things out. Like, what is it that you can do in what situation, how to anticipate potential relapses, how to prepare for them, what to remember, what to do. So we did that. And then she took all our correspondence there, turned it into a table, and printed it out to have like a plan for herself. And then we also discussed how her regular practice, like the daily imperfections and daily spontaneities and forgiveness and self-compassion, how she could progress with this. And she even told me that she would like to go on a meditation retreat, which I will find out in about 2 months when we have a follow-up call that we arranged. I'm really curious if she did that, and if I assume she will at some point listen to the webinar. So I hope that she does that, because I think it would be really, really beneficial for her. So this is a story of change from the point of view of me as a therapist, from the, let's say, from the outside in. And then next time I will interview a client, well, a person who struggled with picking, and then you will get that side of the story as well. How does one overcome picking from their own experience? I would let it go here. And just when we'll go to your questions right now. I want to say just one more thing before we start with the questions. You can still ask them if you have any. I want to say that the reason why I chose this case is because this client had a certain number of topics that I see very frequently. Issues such as control, or struggling with anxiety, or perfectionism. So these are common themes. So I thought it would be relatable to an extent. And then also because it's a very imperfect process of change, right? So it was a therapeutic process that didn't start very well. As a therapist, I like to present things that I didn't do well as those things that I did well, because I think it's more realistic. I don't like, there are very few therapies, if any, that go in such a straightforward linear path. So it was important for me to present you a case that is realistic. There's a person who wants to change but is also reluctant. And then from my side now, when I reflect on the process, I kind of can see not just her resistance, but also my resistance to her to a degree, because she was very invalidating as a client, and then a part of me was quite upset because I'm endlessly patient, and I will really suggest like I will ask a million questions to understand something, but I kept getting no, I don't know, maybe, yes, whatever, or just not no answer at all. And when I look back, I think maybe I could have shared my feedback about resistance with her in a kinder and more patient way. And I wonder sometimes, I don't wonder in the sense that I'm kind of, I did the best I could at the time. But I'm wondering now if maybe I could have approached things differently, because sometimes I have this tendency to be quite direct. And for example, now as I was going through all our work together and, you know, kind of assembling this presentation, I was thinking about sort of different ways that I could handle the situation. So it's not just that I helped her, I think she also helped me grow as a therapist.